would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? All your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. If you enjoy the show and find it of value, consider supporting and becoming a patron via the Patreon at patreon.com/philosophicalminds. A small contribution makes a big difference and definitely makes it easier for me to continue the show, although I will always do my best to keep it flowing regardless. Thank you all, and let's get into it. All right, this evening I'm here with Chloe Deutscher. She's here to talk all things biohacking, mindset, and psychedelics related. So Chloe, maybe to start off, maybe tell myself and the listeners a little bit about yourself. Have you kind of always been interested in human optimization, and or what kind of got you passionate about discussing these sort of things originally?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate to have an athletic career. So at a young age, I was playing really high level volleyball, basketball, and while I was in university, I was studying to be a doctor and playing university at the same time. And so with that kind of crazy schedule, I started realizing that I needed to optimize my performance and my life. And kind of at the same time, I was falling in love with medicine and human health. And so that's really what got me started on this journey and this pathway. And through a lot of twists and turns, I ended up actually going a different route, not studying medicine. I got into chemical engineering. I wanted to be more on the innovation side of things. And through this kind of, human optimization, healing journey, all of these things, I got involved in psychedelics. And so now I actually work full time for a psychedelic company. We manufacture psychedelics for all the clinical research that's going on right now. Well, not all of it, but that's kind of our value proposition, is that we make psychedelics for researchers and clinical trials.
Wow, that's really interesting. And if somebody was to come to you and ask you how to describe biohacking and kind of like what biohacking is, what would you say is biohacking and what's the overall goal?
I would say biohacking is, making modifications and using tools in your life to maximize human potential. So whether that's supplements, breath work, kind of anything you can do to get the most out of your life and to extend the lifespan.
Yeah, breath work is obviously a pretty huge one. With breath work in particular, what would you say, a little bit about like the diversity of different methods, and then what are some of your favorites personally?
Yeah, I think breath work is one of the most underutilized tools that we have. We can completely change our hormones, neurotransmitters, emotions, sometimes within a matter of a few seconds, just by altering the way that we're breathing. So for me, I think, one of my most, favorite tactics or tools is the physiological sigh. So that's a really simple one. Two quick, sharp breaths in through the nose, and then one really exaggerated exhale. And you'll notice that your heart rate drops like substantially as you're doing this. So it's like,
And is that something you would just kind of repeat for a certain amount of time?
It should actually, stimulate the vagus nerve immediately. But if you're somebody who's, panicking or feeling really, really nervous and your heart rate is just super high at that point in time, that's something you can repeat 3 or 4 times. But even once should actually help you to lower your heart rate.
Wow, okay. My familiarity with and like kind of experience with biohacking personally kind of came about with me trying to get my brain calibrated I was prescribed Adderall in high school, and I just didn't really like the way it made me feel. So I became kind of obsessed for a little bit with trying to, study different substances. So I really love this subject, and I wonder from your perspective, what are the most effective? I know everybody's different, but in terms of like neurotropics or cognitive enhancing supplements that you've come across, maybe that you find really seem to benefit a large amount of people or for yourself?
Yeah. I think, my number one, probably like all time favorite supplement is lion's mane. So that's a non hallucinogenic nootropic mushroom that really helps with cognitive performance, mental clarity. I find, especially people that have ADHD, myself included, it really makes a big difference in brain fog and focus. And then another one I really like is cordyceps. That's another mushroom. It helps you to utilize oxygen better. So if you're someone who's into fitness, running, I find that that's really powerful for endurance. Another supplement I just started taking that I've been really interested in lately is NMN, it's nicotinamide mononucleotide. So this one's making quite a bit of a splash with the, biohacking, anti-aging community. Andrew Huberman's talked about it a lot. Tim Ferriss, Tony Robbins, they all take it. And so this one, it's a really powerful anti-aging molecule, which helps to, preserve your mitochondrial health, helps with DNA repair. People are finding that they have better cognitive performance. I'm finding that this is my third month taking it, and I'm definitely noticing a ramp up in my energy levels, and then also just my like endurance, my mental and physical endurance since I've started taking it.
Can you repeat the name of that
Yeah,
again?
yeah. So the short form is NMN, and that's nicotinamide mononucleotide.
Okay.
Hmm.
Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out. It kind of reminds me of was it nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide (NAD)? Is
Yeah,
it?
so that's actually a precursor for it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if you're familiar, but I was wondering what your thoughts are on sometimes you go get certain supplements and they're formulas that are designed for cognition. They'll have ones like vinpocetine, or there's like phosphatidylserine, or
Yeah.
things of that nature. What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah. So I can speak to phosphatidylserine because I've taken it, and that one's supposed to be quite neuroprotective. I found it to have quite good benefits as far as mental clarity and reducing brain fog. The former one I haven't taken before, so I can't really comment on.
Cool, no worries. And then, so when it comes to kind of your overall like daily program, what are a few of your supplements that are like staples in your life that you really see value with, that you kind of just do like pretty consistently, that you would say are big contributors to your overall wellness?
Yeah. So magnesium is definitely a really important one for me. I take magnesium bisglycinate. And so magnesium is actually involved in over 500 different reactions in the body. So it's really powerful in preventing aging, as well as, a lack of magnesium can often result in cardiovascular disease, diabetes, a lot of different age-related diseases. So you want to make sure that you're taking enough magnesium. That's a really important one. Vitamin D, I live in Canada. It's winter 8 months of the year. So that's a really important one for mood. And what else do I have? I have B vitamins. Those are really important in energy metabolism, DNA repair. And so being low in B vitamins is problematic as well. And then other ones that I swear by, I have cacao and maca powder every morning. I try really hard to cut down on caffeine. It's not going particularly well right now. um, but for the most part, I try to have cacao and maca in the morning. I think cacao's beautiful heart opener. If you have ceremonial grade cacao, it's packed full of antioxidants, magnesium as well, and both of them together just help give you a lot of like nice energy and focus for the day.
Yeah, I definitely love both cacao and maca. And I think those are two huge ones that you mentioned, the magnesium and the vitamin D. I think Definitely magnesium is one that I think most, at least Americans, are deficient in from what I
Mhm.
understand. And then I think you said glycinate was your particular magnesium of choice. Could you describe why that is and maybe what are some of the upsides with that particular form?
That format is one of the more bioavailable formats. There's different formulations of magnesium. You can also get complexes out there as well. As far as like DNA repair, cellular recovery, magnesium glycinate is one of the better formulations out there. I'm trying to remember the other name of the formulation. There's ones that actually help with like kind of moving things through you, so bowel movements.
Is the stearate one or no? Is that something else? I'm not sure.
I know.
What's kind of like your protocol or some of your personal guidelines for like your overall diet? Like what would you say are maybe or some things that you restrict or like some kind of guidelines that you kind of keep yourself by or yeah, just tell me a little bit about that. I'm curious.
Yeah, sure. So I'm big on intermittent fasting. I normally eat between a 12-hour window. Usually, sometimes I try to cut it down to 10, but usually eat between noon and 8 p.m. I find that really helps me to reduce inflammation. I have more focus, more energy. Fasting's not for everyone. There is a percentage of the population that it doesn't work for. And then as far as, diet goes, I try to eat plant-based as much as possible. I think everything's about balance. I do love my cheese and occasionally having meat, but I just try to keep those on the down low. So mostly plant-based, and then mostly kind of Mediterranean. So I try to have a lot of healthy fats like avocado and olive oil. And then just for me personally, I've always struggled with gluten. I'm not sure if I am celiac or whatever. So that's just something I don't have in my diet just because my body does not handle it very well.
That's a legit thing. I know so many people who have cut out gluten and it's made drastic changes and like
Hmm.
100% for sure. So yeah, I know a lot of people or there's groups of people that think a lot of that stuff is nonsense, but I know from experience from people I know that that's made a huge difference in their lives from all kinds of issues. So that's cool,
Yeah.
the gluten thing that you mentioned. Is the you're talking a little bit about the fasting
Mhm.
and how some people their bodies aren't really as compatible with that. Is that like a genetic thing?
It is a genetic thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always been curious about that. All right, so psychedelics. Could you give a brief description or a definition of what makes a psychedelic a psychedelic?
Yeah. Essentially, a psychedelic produces non ordinary states of consciousness. A lot of people kind of group hallucinogens into that. So anything that makes you hallucinate, but kind of more widely in bodies, things that, yeah, change your perception or change your consciousness.
Awesome. Okay, and so what are some of the psychedelics that are of primary interest to you right now and why?
Yeah. So there's a lot of like really impactful research going on in the field right now. So I'll maybe go through my three kind of favorite things that I'm most excited about. So first one would be psilocybin. It's having a lot of positive results for depression. It has, a pretty strong safety profile. And then there's also, there's kind of, I guess, two doses of psilocybin. There's the trip dose, and then there's microdosing. I've personally just had a lot of really good benefits with microdosing psilocybin. So that is something that I'm hoping will get rescheduled. It's illegal in a lot of countries and in a lot of states, but just kind of sitting tight and waiting for that. And then LSD is another one. It's another powerful psychedelic. This one's exciting because it can help with, similarly to psilocybin, it can help with depression and anxiety. But LSD is special in a sense that it has analgesic properties. So actually, it changes your perception of pain, which is kind of interesting. There's really early studies going on evaluating low doses of LSD for as a painkiller. So instead of taking an opioid, maybe you take a small subperceptual dose of LSD. And then there's also studies evaluating LSD in Alzheimer's because it does increase blood flow in certain areas of the brain. So to me, that's really exciting that kind of really expands the scope far beyond just mental health. And then the third one I'm probably most excited about would be DMT. I would describe DMT as probably the most powerful psychedelic. This one you have true hallucinations, but what most people find is that they're very powerful and impactful and kind of increase your sense of spirituality or make you feel like there's something beyond yourself. And I think that this can be really healing for somebody with depression or somebody who's having a tough time finding meaning in life. And then looking at it from a medical standpoint, DMT is being evaluated to study depression, but it's also being looked at as a post-stroke recovery, which is really interesting. So what they're finding is in animal models, animals that had been administered a subperceptual amount of DMT, so a DMT essential microdose intravenously, are recovering from stroke faster. So the DMT is preventing damage that occurs from a lack of blood flow in stroke. And then it's also going one step farther to helping heal the damaged neurons and the damaged brain areas from stroke. So that's really exciting.
Wow, that's really cool. I didn't know a lot about that with the DMT or with the LSD, so that's some really interesting information.
Mhm.
And then in terms of the psilocybin,
Mhm.
I often hear about I'm pretty sure, is it psilocybin or lion's mane, or maybe both, with stimulating neurogenesis or something along those lines? Is that a pretty solid understanding now with people that are?
Yeah. So actually, both do that. So both increase the production of BDNF. So that's brain derived nootropic factor. And a really easy way to explain BDNF is it's almost like a fertilizer for the brain. So it stimulates neurogenesis, so growth of new neurons, and then also helps you to establish new neural connections, and it enhances blood flow in certain areas of the brain as well.
Wow, okay. That's fascinating. And then one that I'm curious that I don't know a whole lot about. A friend of a friend, he's actually going through a trial for ketamine. I think he's a police officer or something, and it might have something to do with PTSD or something along those lines. Curious a little bit about ketamine and what's being discovered with that. Like, what's the state of understanding around ketamine and what how that could be beneficial.
Yeah, so ketamine works a bit differently. So most classic psychedelics, like the ones I mentioned, psilocybin, LSD, DMT, they act on your serotonin pathway. So they're very structurally similar to serotonin, and that's how they work. Whereas ketamine works completely differently, but has kind of similar effects. So ketamine is actually a dissociative anesthetic. So the way that ketamine works is it disrupts signal transmission between the brain and the spine. So that's how it works as a painkiller. But ketamine also works on the glutamate pathway. So your glutamate plays a really important role as a messenger, and then in also areas of the brain involved in learning, memory, and emotions. And so when people go and do ketamine therapy, they usually have greater sense of interconnection. They often have an out of body experience, and ketamine is actually very special in a way that it's probably the only psychedelic that you should ever do in a crisis state. So most psychedelics you shouldn't do if you are having a depressive episode, an anxiety attack, anything like that, or suicidal ideation, definitely not. But ketamine actually, someone can go into a ketamine clinic and be in a very severe state, and that'll actually improve someone's state for sometimes up to 7 days after. So it's great for immediate relief of depression.
Wow, that's really cool. I think one of the things I was listening to, I don't know if this is a common one, but they were discussing how it was being used to also revisit like past traumas or something. I think it was like an assisted thing where you're kind of being guided into that
Mhm,
somehow using ketamine, and it seemed like it was pretty beneficial as well.
mhm.
But yeah, that's awesome. Would you consider, is something like MDMA, is that a psychedelic or no? Would you put that in a different category?
So that's kind of a great debate in in the community, but most people refer it to as an empathogen because you don't have any kind of visual effects on MDMA. But that's another one that's having really incredible results, especially for PTSD. So MDMA, it causes the release of a number of different neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline. So this kind of causes you to have this like euphoric feeling. Oh, and it also works on the oxytocin system. So this is your love hormone, and that's what's special about MDMA. So it creates this window of opportunity where you have a strong reduction in fear and you feel a lot of love and connection. So while you're working with a therapist, if you are someone who has PTSD, very often going back to these memories while you're not on MDMA is incredibly painful or nearly impossible because of the trauma response, because the brain and the body shuts down and says no. But MDMA creates this environment where you feel safe and you feel like you can revisit these memories. And often what people find is they can recall these memories in incredibly strong detail. It's called hypermnesia, like when you can have an increased sense of memory. And so you can go back in and you can remember these memories and almost change what they mean to you or change how you respond to them so that you no longer have these PTSD responses once you're no longer on MDMA. And so it's having incredible results. I think MAPS is in their phase 3 studies, and everyone's hoping for a 2023 market authorization of MDMA.
Okay. And MAPS, for people listening, a multidisciplinary association for psychedelic
Yeah.
something or other.
Yeah.
Are you in what you do? Do you guys work with them at all, or?
Yeah. So we will be at their event next year. They're having a psychedelic conference. So we work closely with MAPS. I can't exactly state how at this point in time, but we do work closely with MAPS. We'll be at their conference next year. Psychedelic Science in Denver. I believe it's in June. They're having one of the biggest psychedelic conferences yet. And so I think it'll be really interesting, really exciting. I think the goal is to have that timed out with hopefully when MDMA will be available on the market.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
Now, in terms of precautionary measures or just notes of caution in general with any of these substances, what would you say are some of the pretty well understood precautions in regards to a few of these different modalities?
Yeah, I think one of the key ones is schizophrenia. If you have a personal history or family history of schizophrenia, there's a risk that a psychedelic experience could trigger that. So that's usually the biggest one. Other personality disorders are kind of a proceed with caution, bipolar disorder, things like that. That should be, worked through with a specialist and a therapist. And that depends on a case by case basis, whether or not psychedelics are for you. And then, as I kind of mentioned before, most psychedelics, if you are in an emergency kind of state, if you are currently, experiencing a traumatic event, a depressive episode, something like that, or maybe a serious injury where you're on very high painkillers, things like that, should kind of be taken more in a normal and not, I mean, normal, what is normal for someone who's struggling with depression, anxiety, but maybe just not an emergency state. And so that's the big one. And then kind of on the other side of things is just set and setting and integration are just so crucially and fundamentally important, and that's your mindset going in. So that's kind of, as I mentioned, what is your current mindset like, your setting, that's your environment, who are you doing it with, are you with a practitioner, are you in a place that you feel safe, that you feel like you trust that person that you're with, or you feel comfortable doing this experience. And then once that experience is over, it's really important to take the learnings and translate it, and that's integration. And so all these things kind of factor in.
Nice. All right. Now, In terms of like anti-aging, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it has something to do with the telomere length. What's the current understanding or your understanding in this realm, and what are some like promising or potential big anti-aging like compounds or supplements or something?
Yeah. So essentially, like every time DNA reproduces itself, trying to think of the best way to explain this, but the lengths of the telomeres shorten each time. And so that is one way in which we age. And there's 10 different ways that we age, and a lot of it has to do with mitochondrial damage, you know, DNA damage. And so there's a couple different things that are on the market that I'm really excited about. One of them is metformin. So this is actually a diabetes medicine. So it was one of the like very original diabetes drugs hit the market, which is particularly interesting because there's a lot of safety data on it. And metformin kind of mimics the results of fasting. So metformin really helps with autophagy and clearing out those old senescent cells. It's having a lot of positive results in animal trials, and I believe there's a phase 3 clinical trial called TAME right now evaluating metformin in humans. So really excited to see how that pans out. I think it's showing biomarkers that it could prevent cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and a lot of other age-related diseases. That would be the first one. The second one I'm really excited about is rapamycin. It works on the mTOR pathway, and I haven't tried rapamycin myself. NMN, as I mentioned before, that would probably be the most accessible for someone that you can buy that one over the counter. Whereas rapamycin, metformin, you'd have to go see a physician for that and get prescribed that. And those are also, still in the early clinical stages. So they're obviously like taking something like that you'd be using off label. There's still some calculated risk involved in that. And then, as far as like free interventions go, if intermittent fasting does work for you, that is probably like one of the easiest ways to extend your lifespan.
And could you just describe that real quick for people if maybe
Yeah.
they're not familiar with the term intermittent fasting, like what that means and how you'd go about that?
Yeah. So intermittent fasting means you only eat in a specific time interval. So you're just restricting the amount of time in which you're eating. So there's different protocols. Some people may take a full 24 hours off of eating in which they don't ingest anything. The most a 12 or 16-hour interval, or sorry, eating window. And so I do a 12-hour, sorry, no, wait, eight, 8 hour. My mind's all foggy today, but yeah, so I do an 8 hour eating window. So sorry, 16 and 8 is the correct protocol that I'm trying to get at here. And so that's the protocol I use. I find that's like the easiest place to start. So I find I have my like last meal at 8 p.m. before bed. It's easiest not to eat while you're sleeping. I find the mornings sometimes are tough when you're getting used to it. Some little hacks that I've learned along the way. You can have coffee. It's just important not to have any sugar. So I put sometimes like avocado oil or fatty oil or coconut oil in my coffee, and that helps a lot. If you're kind of desperate and you need to eat something, just like a little scoop of protein, as long as it's low in sugar, that's really helpful. But essentially, intermittent fasting gives your body a break from digesting, it gives your mitochondria a chance to recover, and it also triggers autophagy. So autophagy helps to get rid of and clear out old cells that are no longer dividing. And these cells are really problematic for causing cardiovascular disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, things like that.
Oh, okay. And then there's another one that I wanted to ask you about because I'm not sure. It's called resveratrol. Is that what's the status with that? Because I think that was kind of debated whether that had any significant effect or not for a while. So I'm wondering what you think about.
Yeah, so resveratrol is a powerful antioxidant found in red wine, and there have been mixed results on it. My personal perspective of resveratrol is that, what they're finding is in a lot of cultures, like in the Mediterranean, for example, Sardinia has some of the longest living people concentrated in that area. And so if you look at the diets, these people are drinking a lot of red wine, having olive oil, things like that. And so in my opinion, looking at that, I think resveratrol is helpful.
What else did I want to ask you? Like food additives and things that people would typically want to avoid. What would you say are like some of the huge ones?
Some of the huge ones. So, I believe everything is in moderation. So like it's okay to have these things every once in a while. But a big one would be deep fried food, actually. So reheating vegetable oils can be very carcinogenic. And when you heat vegetable oils and reheat them, they release aldehydes. And then these vegetable oils are really high in polyunsaturated fatty acids, which can cause inflammation and cellular damage. So that's a big one to stay away from. Unfortunately, I love French fries. It's hard, but I treat myself on occasion. Other ones, sodium nitrates, preservatives in meat. There's nitrates that exist naturally in vegetables, but they seem to not be problematic. It's the meat preservatives, especially when you're cooking them. Those can cause inflammation and cancer. So if you see just sodium nitrate on any kind of like meat packaging, try to stay away from it, or at least try not to cook it. And then other things, hormones and antibiotics in meat. I think it's important, and I know it's expensive, it gets more expensive, but sourcing your meat from maybe smaller farms that aren't, antibiotic free meat, grass fed versus grain fed is always better. And then what else do I try to avoid? Actually, glyphosates. We were talking about gluten earlier, and sometimes I think that a lot of people with gluten intolerances might just have glyphosate intolerances because glyphosates can really disrupt the endocrine system. They can cause inflammation, affect your gut health. And so it's important to look for organic when you're looking at your grains. So glyphosates are sprayed on, I think, in really high doses in almonds, kind of corn, wheat.
I can't believe at this point that we're still using glyphosate. It just blows my mind.
Literally, it's shocking.
Yes.
And then you see some like, US or advertisements that say like glyphosates show no link to, health risks. And I look at that and I'm like, what the
You're like,
what? You're like, that is like the biggest BS of all time.
yeah.
It's like
Oh man.
so yeah. It's seriously crazy that we still spray things with glyphosate.
So what would you say your overall in terms of health, biohacking, psychedelics, overall breath work, your most important message that or just the message in general, anything that you would wish to convey to anybody listening about health and wellness in general, what would you say?
Yeah, I think for anyone in health and general wellness in general, a couple things. So I think one of the most important things in health, wellness, and in life is to like deeply know yourself and know what works for you, and to be curious, because what works for me or what works for somebody else might not work for you. And if meditation works for you, amazing. And if it doesn't, then there'll be something else. And so I think it's really important to know and be curious and find out what does work for you. And then when you do find it, being consistent is really, really important. But being consistent doesn't mean being perfect. And what you do, 80% of the time or 90% of the time. And if you are somebody that can hit 100 all the time, that's incredible, but that's not most people. That's not me, and that'll never be me. So consistency, what you do repeatedly over time is more important than what you do once. And as you're going through this journey and as you're trying to better yourself and improve your life, I think it's really important to also be compassionate with yourself in this process, that you're not always going to be perfect. And You don't need to blame yourself if you have a bunch of deep fried food or you skip a day at the gym. Like, you are a human being and you're doing the best you can. And it's only going to cause yourself harm if you're beating yourself up. Like, the fact that you're showing up every day and you're trying to better yourself, like, that's incredible and that should be celebrated. And, you deserve to have some treats on occasion. So yeah, be consistent, be compassionate, and know yourself.
Beautiful. Well, if people wanted to find out more about you or what you're up to or any of the information that you're putting out, where would you direct them to?
Yeah, I would say mostly I post on TikTok. So my TikTok handle is just my name. So Chloe Deutscher, CHLOEDEUTSCHER. And you can also find me on LinkedIn under that same name. Yeah, and that's where I mostly post about my biohacking, health, psychedelics, all of that.
Excellent. Well, this was awesome. I greatly appreciate you and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It was really nice to meet you.